like to thank all the esteemed panelists who have joined us today. I'd like to, in the first place, thank Professor Anand Mohan, Head of Pulmonology at the AIMS New Delhi. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. Indeed, a privilege and pleasure to have you this evening with us.
Thank you.
On an important, so directly important, so important and related to your field. I'd like to welcome my good old friend, Dr. Chandrakant Laheria, physician and epidemiologist and public policy and health specialist. Thanks, Dr. Laheria, for joining us. A warm welcome to Dr. Anusha Rohit, Head Department of Microbiology at the Madras Medical Mission. Thank you very much, Dr. Anusha. A warm welcome to you for being on this panel. I'd like to specifically thank our president, Mr. Pradeep Multani, for his kind presence to encourage us and also participate in this particular webinar. My thanks goes out to our chair, Dr. Harsh Mahajan of the Hospitals and Diagnostics Committee of PhD Chamber. Thank you very much, Dr. Mahajan, for always encouraging and pushing us forward to do these kind of programs. My thanks to Dr. Sameer Gupta and Dr. Deep Goyal, the co-chairs of the Hospital and the Diagnostics Committee of PhD Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I would like to especially thank Dr. G.N. Kazi, who has joined us this evening. Dr. Kazi is, of course, a very eminent person from the fraternity of education as well as medicine. So thank you very much, Dr. Kazi, for being here. I'd like to thank our Secretary General, Mr. Saurabh Sanyal, for joining us this evening. It's a very important topic today, I think, Omicron and as well as the booster dose, which is top of the mind for all of us, whether we are back at homes, working from home, or back in the hospitals struggling with patients, or even test labs who are finding it difficult to cope up with the test loads. So to kickstart the evening today, I'd like to request Dr. Harsh Mahajan, the chair of the Diagnostics and the Hospital Committee of PhD Chamber of Commerce and Industry, to kindly give his welcome remarks. Over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Vivek. It's indeed both a pleasure and honor for me to welcome three luminaries of the field of medicine who will be discussing the scourge of COVID. It's been 2 years since we've been embroiled in this unique pandemic, and we've had our good days and bad. We've had our victories, and we've seen during the months of April and May massive devastation across different parts of the country and, of course, the world itself. And there are no better persons than these to shed light on this, to tell us where we are today, what is the path forward, and of course, with the availability of vaccines in this country for over a year now, where do booster doses stand? So we will discuss all of this. It's also an honor that both the President as well as the Secretary General of PhD Chamber of Commerce and Industry have felt that this was an important enough topic to be actually present live with us to encourage us. Thank you very much. And Dr. Kazi, thank you for taking time out and joining us. I'm sure we'll have a very, very fruitful, lively discussion, both academic as well as practical, which will help us in the weeks and months ahead. Welcoming you all again. Thank you very much. Over to you, Vivek.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mahajan. Um, I think it's time for me to request Dr. Sameer Gupta, our co-chair for the Hospital and Diagnostics Committee and director of the Cardiac Path Lab Metro Group of Hospitals, to give his introductory remarks on today's topic. Over to you, Dr. Sameer.
Thank you so much, Mr. Siegel, and I'd like to warmly welcome the three eminent speakers of today, Dr. Laharia, Dr. Mohan, and Dr. Rohits. I think your input today is going to be very important. But, you know, if you think about it, it's really not that long ago when we learned about COVID. I saw this post on Twitter a few months back where it was written coronavirus / causes a common cold. This was from somebody's medical textbook. And I remarked at that doctor in the US that I said, you know, 5 years ago or even 2.5 years ago, this is all we knew about the coronavirus. This is all that we were taught. And today, everything has changed. In a brief period of 2 years, the world has encountered about 32 million COVID cases, and 3.6 million of those cases, almost 10% of those cases, are in India. That is a huge, huge number. Just yesterday in Delhi, we had 20,000 odd cases with a 30% positivity rate. And we all know that's probably a likely underestimation, because a lot of my patients, a lot of people whom I know in my network are not even getting an RT-PCR. They're using the home-based test and they're just diagnosing themselves that way. Now, one of the biggest things that has happened in the treatment of COVID is the entire medical community across the world, in patterns never been seen before, has come together and found novel therapeutic agents and developed the vaccinations, which is a major topic of today with the booster dose. So we've really found vaccinations, but vaccinations are not something new, right? If you go back in the medical textbooks and history, it was just in 1796 when Edward Jenner found that those people who were exposed to the mild cowpox virus, they ended up getting a very mild form of smallpox. Smallpox about 200 years ago was devastating, causing a lot of mortality across the world. And this small discovery, this small thing was the birth of vaccinations. Going forward, 150, 200 years, smallpox is now eradicated. It is one of the only infectious diseases in the world that has been eradicated. So vaccinations has been great. It is one of the biggest discoveries in modern medicine, along with clean drinking water and antibiotics. These three things, vaccinations, antibiotics, and clean drinking water, has significantly improved longevity of people and also led to a better quality of life. Now, in fact, vaccinations, today I was just reading an article where they were saying that multiple sclerosis is caused by the Epstein-Barr virus, which causes infectious mononucleosis. For those of you who don't know, it is something which is commonly seen in college students, in children, where they get some inflammation in the tonsils, and it is caused by the Epstein-Barr virus. And that has a 32-fold increased risk of having multiple sclerosis, which is a brain condition. And now there's a antibiotic and there's a vaccine in the works for this, which can prevent the infection and possibly treat multiple sclerosis. So vaccines are absolutely phenomenal. Now, when you think of vaccination in India, we have two primary vaccines, the Covishield and the Covaxin. And these two vaccines have, and one of them is the indigenous made, the Covaxin, and the Covishield is manufactured in India with the technology from across the world. Now, with Omicron, which has now become the dominant virus, the dominant strain of patients across the world, we often talk about it as being a mild virus. It doesn't cause major infection. It's mild, yes, it is mild also because those people who are now facing this are already immunized. They have vaccines, they have antibodies, either from the primary infection or from vaccinations, and hence it is mild for them. But it is, and in fact, just yesterday in today's paper, it was noted that out of the 97 deaths which occurred in India, which occurred in Delhi in the last 4 or 5 days, 89 of them, 89 out of 97 were not vaccinated. So vaccinations have certainly played a very important role in the reduction of mortality for the primary Wuhan strain, for the Delta strain, and now also for the Omicron strain. I think the infection is certainly milder, and we're also seeing that the hospital bed utilization has also been significantly lower than what it was in the second wave of COVID, which was not too long ago, just 6 months ago. Compared to that, the hospital beds are now lying vacant, which have been designated for COVID. In our hospital network also, which has about 1,500 total beds, we have allocated close to 600, 700 beds exclusively for COVID, out of which I was checking the census, less than 100 of them are occupied. So that is what we are seeing across the country and across the hospital network, and that's good news. But when you think of vaccines, when we're thinking of Omicron, one thing which we also have to think about is long COVID. Long COVID is not something which is to be taken lightly. There are a lot of people who are having problems of long COVID, and I'm sure our eminent speakers will be talking about that today also. The other thing is children. The vaccines, as of the data for vaccinations from children, which is coming out, is very encouraging. With the Pfizer vaccine, there has been a 93% reduction in hospitalization with the booster dose also in children. So there's a lot of good news as far as vaccination is concerned, even for Omicron. But there was a recent French paper which came out that showed that even after the booster dose, the immunity against Omicron starts going down, and maybe there is a requirement for a fourth booster for us to try and keep the immunity at bay. Because if you have to remember, the vaccines were made against the original Wuhan strain from China, which is about 2 years old. A lot has changed since then. A lot of mutations have happened since then. And I feel that the newer booster doses that are going to come out should try and address the newer strains. And I personally feel that going forward, COVID will become endemic, and we will also have yearly vaccinations just like we have for the flu. Thank you very much. And I would love to hear what the other eminent speakers have to say.
Thank you, Dr. Samir, for your opening remarks and about this Omicron and the current status for vaccination and how it's really becoming helpful in reducing the mortality. May I now request Dr. Deep Goyal, co-chair of the Hospital and Diagnostics Committee of PhD Chamber and Senior Director and HOD of Robotic Surgery at the Dr. BLK Kapoor Hospital, Max BLK Kapoor Hospital.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Vivek, for having me on the show. And as was rightly pointed out by my predecessor, Harsh, and my friend, that we know that this wave is different from others. But somehow, unfortunately, as a society and as government and other authorities, we have not been able to curb the paranoia. And we must learn from the West, as we have learned in the past, that we follow the curve which world is following, especially the Western world, whether it is the bed requirement, whether it is the number of people who are getting infected. And similarly, we had anticipated that, we will, in large numbers in our country, we will have people who will be infected, especially because this strain is very, very virulent. And thankfully, it is not, it's very, very infectious, not as virulent as Delta variant. And this is something which we will have to learn to live with, because we will keep on seeing these mutations. Not necessarily mutations are going to be bad. And there is obviously a view that this particular wave is going to infect all of us and get us immune against this particular deadly virus. And probably this is going to be the end of the pandemic. And this is going to be like living with the common cold, for which we have not found any cure yet. So I think we have to, in our mind, understand and console our mind that this is something which is probably not going to go away. We will have to learn to live with it. We will have to learn to coexist with it and continue with our daily lives and economic activities. And different countries are adopting different protocols. And, you know, we were reading in the news yesterday that Spain has said that no masks are required anymore and one can go on with their normal lives. In spite of humongous numbers in US and UK, their activity continues to continue. They have not imposed any curbs on the social gatherings or the economic activities. And since the numbers are very less, which are getting admitted, and the morbidity mortality is less, also we need to segregate the people who are dying. You know, today, since it's a very, very infectious virus, anybody, you know, dying and having an asymptomatic COVID will be labeled as a COVID death. So that also needs to be taken into account. We see it every day in our hospitals where, you know, we are about to operate a patient, and during the investigations, it comes out to be COVID positive, asymptomatic COVID positive. Similarly, people who are dying or who are in ICU and they get COVID, we need to segregate them from whether it is an asymptomatic COVID or the real morbidity is because of COVID. Also, there is an ethical issue of, you know, testing everybody, whoever is getting admitted in the hospital. That is largely because to save the healthcare workers rather than anything else, because also there is a lot of confusion regarding the quarantine period. You know, we all started with 2 weeks, then came down to 10 days, 7 days. Now in UK, people who are asymptomatic, they are being allowed to come back to work in 5 days' time. So that is something I think as a country we should have learned from the West, and straight away we should have started with 5 days quarantine. Again, I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned, since we are, you know, not leading the wave. We are following, we are behind in the curve. About the vaccination, again, there's a lot of confusion, you know, whether which vaccine to be taken, whether the booster dose is required and not required, it should, which company, whether you should mix and match. So I think we are looking for so many answers from today's talk. And with this, I will pass on the buck to the speakers now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Deep, for highlighting issues and, of course, points which we'd like to discuss this evening. And, of course, very importantly, when you said that, you know, we must also figure out when we talk about the deaths, there are actual reasons for something like that to happen. So without much ado, I think all of us are waiting to hear our specialists for the evening, whether it's Professor Anant Mohan, all the way from AIIMS, Delhi. I think he's shouldering a lot of responsibility as we speak. We have Dr. Laheria and Dr. Anucha Rohit, and of course, Dr. G.N. Kazi. So I will most humbly request Dr. Harsh Mahajan, Chair of the Hospital and Diagnostics Committee of PhD and the founder and chief radiologist of Mahajan Imaging. Though you need no introduction, Dr. Mahajan, but I think it's imperative to just introduce you with your
that's
full
fine.
That's
fine, Vivek. That's fine. I think we need to hear the experts.
Yes, sir.
And we have quite a large number of people waiting to hear them. So let's dive straight into the topic proper. Thank you very much.
Over to you, sir, for taking the session forward with these panelists, esteemed panelists.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And we have three of the most renowned people here with us. And, what I thought is that we will have them have their say to begin with. We will start with Dr. Anant Mohan, who is someone who is dealing with COVID on a day-to-day basis. He has both an internal as well as a bird's eye view of the disease. Then we go to Dr. Laheria, who, apart from being a physician, is an epidemiologist, and he can give us an overview of where he feels this pandemic is heading? What are the policies? What is right? What is wrong? What do we learn from the West? What can we teach the West? And what is it that we should not be doing, as has been done in other parts of the world? And then we have Dr. Anusha, who will, of course, as a microbiologist, is very, very important to tell us about the testing, what is required, when is it required, and what are the kind of tests that would be necessary. And then we'll have Dr. Kazi coming in and giving his own opinion on the scheme of things. Of course, everyone should remember that we have a lay audience. These are not doctors who are present. So just keep that in mind. Having said that, may I request Dr. Anand Mohan to please unmute, and could we hear from you, sir? What do you think is the state of the pandemic today, and how concerned should we be, and what are the do's and don'ts as you see fit? Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Mahajan, and thank you very much to all the members and to all of the PhD Chamber of Commerce for kind of inviting me here. A pleasure to be amongst you. And as the previous speakers already have given a very nice background to the way this whole pandemic has panned out in the last 2 years, what basically I'd like to add is a little bit from our own perspective, from the clinical perspective, from the diagnostic and from the management perspective, how we see it as you know, the first wave, which started in the early 2020s. So at that time, that peaked somewhere in June, July or so. And that was the time when we were actually absolutely raw. We had no idea what was going on at that point of time. There was a huge amount of panic. By that time, USA was already peaking to several. New York was in a bad shape. And here the lockdown was implemented, if you remember, in somewhere around 22nd or 23rd March 2020, if I remember correctly, by a prime minister.
That's right, sir. That's right.
So basically, at that point of time, again, there were a lot of fear. So it was the fear factor of the unknown which was going on at that point of time. None of us were experienced in handling this kind of a situation, to be honest, and at any level, actually. So, but that lockdown, some people say, why that lockdown? Why so long? Well, one can debate about that, so about the length of it. But I do feel personally, it was very important because if you remember, just at that time, we had around 500 odd cases in the country. What it did help the couple of weeks at that time was for us to kind of prepare the infrastructure, at least to some level. See, at that time, none of us had heard about what is PPE. Nobody knew. Nobody knew what was sanitizers. Nobody knew what was an N95 mask. Now it is a household name, actually. At that point of time, nobody knew about it. And forget about how to use it, how to make it available to people in lakhs and crores. So there were so many problems. Probably that lockdown helped us to tide over that crisis, at least partly, to get the things in order, manufacture things, distribute them, do a bit of quality control, and all these things. So we were able to manage that part, come over to the end of 2020. Then things started becoming better, and we thought that all is going to be fine. And then, of course, then, it came the brutal Delta wave, which came starting from March, April again, and April, May, June were the worst possible months. The problem with this particular wave was the high fatality, the high rate of severe illness, and the clinical features were different. So the first wave had more of upper respiratory symptoms, a little bit of pneumonia-like symptoms, and more often than not, for example, the taste and smell loss and some GI symptoms, abdominal symptoms were there. In the second phase, that is the Delta wave, we had much more of mnemonic symptoms, pneumonia-like symptoms, need of oxygen, ventilator, multi-organ failure, cardiac failure, all kind of strokes, thrombosis. So all kind of complications came. So it was a pretty bad time, as we all know, and that went on for about 2 to 3 months. So that was also the time when the vaccination had just about started. I must say that the vaccination drive, the scientists really need to be commended, for the kind of job they have done in manufacturing and not just manufacturing, then testing the vaccines in such a record short period of time. And they got emergency approval, and that started from January 2021. By the time the Delta wave started, only a small proportion of people in the country were still vaccinated. So that is why probably the protection was much less. And then beyond that, the vaccination drive picked up from that on. And now we know that a substantial proportion of people across the country are at least partly vaccinated, and a substantial proportion are fully vaccinated also. Now, again, when we were now in a comfort zone in the last 1 or 2 months from October, November, we were thinking in terms of we were just about getting back to normal as far as all social, economic, medical activities were concerned. So then we had this again new mutation of Omicron detected from South Africa. I won't say it originated from there, but it was diagnosed there first. So we should not call it the South African variant. I think they don't like it. So they say that we were the ones who actually diagnosed it. So that is for them. Now, in this wave, again, as far as the differences are concerned, as already mentioned, fortunately, the trend is the clinical features are much milder. They are mostly upper respiratory, presenting with fever, sore throats, a little bit of even less than sore throat, some amount of dry cough, and nose congestion, nose stuffiness, running nose. So these kind of symptoms which closely mimic the other seasonal influenza or common cold in a way. So 90 to 95% of these people actually recover on their home with home isolation. As per the national guidelines, they do not require hospitalization at all because the need of oxygen is minimal. So that is the good thing. The bad thing is that it is highly transmissible, much more than the previous waves. That is why one person can transmit to many more people as compared to what he would have done in the previous variants. That is one. So that is why if you see the curve of this, it is going right up vertical exponentially as compared to the earlier two waves. And the numbers are, that is why suddenly going into lakhs and lakhs within no time at all. You can see India has crossed 3 to 4 lakh cases a day. Delhi from 30 cases a day 1 month back, today is 28,000 cases a day. Again, it is an exponential jump, and we are still not at the peak. It is still rising. We don't know what will be the upper level of this cutoff. So although I would say that in a way it is good, people are getting infected. Many of them are even asymptomatic and recovering. So they can all be managed in home isolation. But the absolute numbers, if they go into lakhs and lakhs and maybe crores, then obviously even a small proportion of patients, if they become sick, they will put a bigger burden on the healthcare resources. So that is what we have to always be prepared for. And that is why all the preparation in the second wave, Delta wave of oxygen, beds, everything may be very useful and may stand us in good stead if at all required. God forbid, if it is required, hopefully it will not be. So that is kind of a standby preparation. But yes, now in some parts of the world, the condition has peaked and probably plateaued. In USA, still at many places, it's in a very bad shape. So hopefully it will come down as fast as it has gone up. That is what the natural behavior of the virus is, and we'll have our own experts, our microbiology colleagues probably may kind of elaborate on that. But what we feel so far, whatever patients we have seen, if it infects one, it will infect 10 more around him, even though they may be asymptomatic. But most of them are home isolated. They are asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic, and they need only a couple of days of isolation and just a little bit of symptomatic care. So that is the positive side. I think I'll stop at this point, then we can deal with other questions later, the post-COVID thing, etc. We can take up subsequently.
Thank you very much, Professor Anand. May I now request Dr. Laharia to give his opinion as to public health perspective, from a policy making perspective. We are seeing that the narrative keeps changing as we learn the same narrative coming that let's all get infected and it'll wear out. Everyone will get the virus, the disease. Everyone will become immune, and we'll get herd immunity. the herd immunity figures keep going up. Europe, we hear, is now thinking of, letting people get infected. Is that the correct way? Would that, and what is the lesson for India? Dr. Laria, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Mahajan. And let me also thank PhD Chambers of Commerce and Industry for inviting me to speak here. It's always a pleasure to speak to a different audience and especially such an eminent group. So thanks. Moving quickly to what is going to happen and where are we, especially in terms of protection. Dr. Anant Mohan gave a really good description, overview of the entire scenario. Now, what in India, though we are seeing every day around 290,000 cases are being reported, that's an approximate number yesterday, new infections were reported. But overall situation is following, that we know that after second wave, around 2/3 of India's population had developed seropositivity, which means they had an antibody, or they had a natural infection, or some through the vaccination. Since then, by end of this year, or even now, by now, 90% of India's adult population has received at least one shot of vaccine, and 70% adult population, both shots. With this, we were fairly confident that we have come out of the woods. We were preparing for normal life, but then Omicron came. But there is a positive side of it. The number of cases are rising, but what we are seeing in all the countries which had a Omicron variant, that there is something called decoupling of infection from disease. So the cases are increasing, infections are increasing, but the hospitalization rate is low. And in all of this, there are many things which are really assuring. Assuring is that the 2 shots of vaccines which were given to the people, and that is the reason that this decoupling is happening. So the first message I would like to say that the vaccines which we have administered to our population are working. 2 shots of vaccines prevent from severe disease, hospitalization, and death. And those 2 shots continue to provide protection for 9 months or probably a year. We don't know beyond 1 year as of now, but most likely would continue to provide against that outcome. Now, people are surprised, and now, but everybody should not be surprised that infection is happening, because we know that this is a respiratory illness. SARS-CoV-2 is a respiratory virus. Dr. Samir Gupta mentioned earlier that this virus, coronavirus, was first reported in 1947 in animals. In humans, 1952. Majority of time, there are 4 coronavirus which cause common cold. So these are viruses known for common cold. They keep changing, they infecting. So what happened that this is a respiratory illness. With the respiratory illness, even after natural infection, immunity declines over a period of time, and we might get exposed. But with the vaccines prevent from severe disease, but they do not prevent from infection. So infection is happening. There is no blame to the vaccines, because vaccines don't have that kind of role. To prevent from infection, we need mask or other COVID appropriate behavior. But then this Omicron variant is more transmissible. Even the traditional or the mask which were preventing us the way earlier, they are not preventing. So we are getting infection. Everybody is getting infection, but we are not developing disease. What is another important thing which I want to flag is that we have experience from South Africa, UK, and other settings, that we know that Omicron infection in any setting spread really quickly. And when I say really quickly, within 2 to 3 weeks, exponentially the cases rise, and then it reaches the peak in that setting, and then equally same speed the cases start falling. So of course, infection spread quickly, but infection declined very quickly, and that's the one part. There is another positive side in context of immunity. Some of the South African studies say that if people had a past infection or even vaccination, and after that, if Omicron infection happens, thereafter, person has at least 14-fold higher level of antibodies, which can prevent from future infection, of course, of Omicron, but also Delta variant. So this is the current scenario. We have natural immunity because of second wave. We have vaccination. The infection is spreading. Many people believe that since this is mild, after this infection, India might in a stage where where like we might say that this is a mild disease unless a new variant emerge. I'll come about the variant part. I'll touch about that. So what is being expected from going by experience from other settings that in like currently some rise in the major cities, then we might see like now we have already started seeing increase in the COVID-19 cases in medium or small size cities and even rural India. So what is expected, because it follows that peak cycle of 3 to 4 weeks from this from the start, and then cases start declining. So it's very likely that cases in India might continue to increase at least for another 6 weeks or 8 weeks. But India might not see a very high peak, like unlike the US, which is reporting 1.3 million, because it's a different geography or different context. But in India, expectation is that the major cities will peak out, and then cases will start declining. Then there might be rise in the medium or smaller town, and then finally rural India. So it will be phased wave. So we might still see a very high number of cases, daily new COVID-19 cases, but they will be. It will not be in one go. But the projections are that by end of February or early March, this week wave could be over. That's why various projections show. But it is very likely that this particular variant would infect, or everyone who is exposed will get this variant, in a sense that we know that if one member of family is infected, then all the members of family get infected. Of course, many remain asymptomatic. We know that out of 10 people who get infection, 9 are asymptomatic, but there are estimates, and we know that in Mumbai and Delhi, it is very likely that a large proportion of population has already been exposed, and remaining will be exposed. And that's why the current discussion is that there is limited value in conducting excessive testing of asymptomatic, limited value in tracing contacts, because contact tracing entire idea was that you trace the contact, stop the transmission. But transmission is so widespread, there is limited value in all of these. I would say that fortunately this is mild for majority of the people. Decoupling in the terms of infection and disease is there, but people who are at a higher risk, and this is for a wider audience which is attending, that people who are healthy, people who are fully vaccinated, and people who are adult age group, they are really low risk, fairly low risk. In medical science, everything cannot be predicted, but younger than 60, healthy, fully vaccinated are at very low risk. Children are at low risk. However, anybody who has a pre-existing condition, unvaccinated, partially vaccinated, or 60 plus population, they have a risk of developing similar kind of disease, even with the Omicron, which they could have developed with Delta. So there is a separate type of population. We still need to protect population. We still need to be prepared. Final part I would come to that the precaution shot has started. This is important. Anyone who is eligible should get. One of the concern many people have, they say that other countries are giving booster shot for a while to entire adult population. My point here is that in vaccination, especially COVID-19 vaccination, probably everyone or majority of people would require booster. The only discourse is that at what interval from the last second shot. So the interval between the two, the booster dose and primary immunization. Then second question is that which vaccine they should get as booster. And these are the main questions. So the key difference is that other countries, US and other settings, are using mRNA-based vaccine. They are highly efficacious and produce high level of antibody, but their antibody level decline very quickly after 4 to 6 months. That's why they require frequent booster. In India, majority of vaccination started, like we know, after July and August, and before that people were exposed to the natural infection. So Indian population has something called hybrid immunity, natural infection plus 2 shots of vaccine. That's why the Indian population is being considered better protected. But those who received the vaccines longer, a little earlier, health workers, frontline workers, it's 9 months. And on a precautionary note, while waiting for more evidence, they are recommended for booster shot. The key part is that for healthy population, because adult population started getting vaccines little later, they are exposed. There is scientific evidence of this is called hybrid immunity, which provide longer protection. But in the booster, there is another global evidence, and this is plenty of scientific evidence, that if a booster shot is given, then preferable booster shot is a vaccine on a different platform. So countries which are giving a vaccine on like a viral vector, which is Covishield, or other vaccines, they are giving, most of the countries are giving mRNA-based vaccine as booster. India does not have that choice. So the second best booster shots are protein-based vaccine, Covovax, Corbevax, which are coming in India. And third best is if you give a booster on with the same platform. So in India, because we have a limited choice in terms of availability, Indian government as of now has started booster on the same platform. Now that's not completely bad, because there are studies which have been done which show that even if you give a same third shot of Covishield vaccine, it will result in increase in antibodies. So antibody will increase. Even with the Covaxin, there is a recent study which say antibody will increase. But we don't know how much antibody is enough. That is what is being weighted. What we know that if mRNA-based vaccine is given, quantity of antibody would increase at far greater value. If protein-based vaccine are given, then antibody quantity will be second next to the mRNA-based vaccine. But if you give same vaccine, even then antibody will increase. So the idea of booster dose is increasing antibody. If we had a choice, we would have given a vaccine which would increase maximum antibody, but this is a good choice. And I will conclude by saying that two things. One is that it's very likely that because Indian government has given emergency use authorization for two more vaccines, which are protein-based vaccine, Covovax and Corbevax. These vaccines are not available yet, but in my opinion and going by the market information, these two vaccines might be available in early February or mid-February. And then, in my opinion, Indian government may allow that people might have a choice that they can get either a homologous vaccine or a heterologous vaccine, but there would be a choice. The key thing is that when the vaccination booster shot for other population will be opened, now that is going to be a little more complicated, because I personally think that we should not be in rush to give a booster shot, more so because Omicron wave is happening, and with the two booster shots, two vaccine shots and a fresh infection, essentially after every infection, you can wait for another 3 months minimum, up to 6 months for a booster, another shot or vaccine, regular vaccine shot. So with Omicron wave going on across the country, there is no rush for a majority of population which is not eligible to get booster shot. But it is likely that 6 months later or sometimes a booster shot might be required for even wider adult population, comorbidities, health worker, or some other group. So by then we will have better science, but there is no rush. But I'll conclude by saying the key point, this is a respiratory illness. People have been exposed. So our population is not the same as it was like many months ago, years ago, 2 years ago. So our population is protected, but immunity declined. So there would be certain point of time when people might require booster. We don't know whether it's after 1 year of 2 shots, after 15 months, after 9 months, or 2 years, but booster shots will be administered. And by then, world will have more vaccines, better understanding of science. We will be having answer to majority of questions, and that will be the good beginning. I stop here. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Laharia. You've really made things very simple. So you say if your turn comes for the vaccine, do get the vaccine. If it's your turn for getting a booster, do get the booster. Even though we may not have a different booster to give, still taking the same shot as a booster also helps. And there is that Oxford study that is there where they showed that the third dose of AstraZeneca or Covishield also was very helpful. At the same time, you say that we have to prevent getting infected as much as possible, and for that we must follow COVID appropriate behavior, because those below 60 healthy children, vaccinated people, they will have mild disease, but then those who have comorbidities or those who are above 60 years of age, they may not have the same clinical outcomes of a mild variety, and hence we have to protect them. So I think these, messages, both by Dr. Anand Mohan and by you, are very, very clear. And now to the person, Dr. Anusha, who actually made it possible that we know that there is a different virus. We know how to actually diagnose someone who's infected with it, and also who are able to take us through this changing mutations that happen, the virus changing its form and leading to discovery of newer viruses or mutants of concern. So, Dr. Anusha, the floor is yours. Please take us through the entire story. Also, now it seems that India predominantly is going through, and maybe more than 90% of all infections are Omicron, but count that we have, they say that, 2 lakh or 3 lakh infections, only a few thousand are Omicron. Why is that? Could you actually shed light on that?
Thank you so much at the outset for having me here today with you all. It is an honor to be a part of this program. I'd like to share a small presentation as we talk so that it gives more clarity with a little bit of pictures. So please give me that opportunity.
Please go ahead.
Is my screen visible to everybody?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. So, the virus actually came out in by 10th of Jan 2020. We had the full sequence of the virus, which essentially allowed us to create a very good, diagnostic kits that would help us. Within 2 months into the pandemic, and we already had kits that could help us detect the virus almost immediately. And that was a phenomenal feat from the microbiologists and from the researchers in the lab who actually used to work with the virus. Now, it is important for us to understand that from there, we have to see how the timeline of the virus has changed. And like Dr. Anand said right at the beginning, the initial concept of the WHO was to test, trace, and isolate. And in that respect, it was important that we had a different kits that were available for testing and different labs that could, test. In fact, I would agree with him that the first lockdown was very, very important because as an NABL assessor myself, I know I was part of many assessments across the country to get labs to be able to test. And ICMR and the NABL have done yeoman service to the country in getting so many labs to be tested. To this day, I have friends in the UK who tell me that it takes 4 days for a result to come through there. Whereas here, you're getting the result within 24 hours. And that's only because there are so many labs across the country. If somebody had told us, in 2019 that you're going to have RT-PCR rampant across the country, I think it would sound like a joke. But today it's not a joke anymore. It is actually a reality that we have been able to look at. Now, these are the general targets that we are seeing as far as, looking at what are the assays that can look at different targets for detecting the virus. So you have either ORF1 A or B, you have the S target, and you have the E gene, and you have the N gene. These are the general targets that are there by most assays which are there in the market, of which it is interesting that those assays that can detect the S gene along with, so generally most assays detect at least 2 or 3 genes, which are giving us a confirmatory that the virus is present now, or the viral particles are present. Let me put it that way. So if you have an assay that can detect the S gene along with another gene, that seems to be the most current best way that we can without sequencing. Of course, sequencing is good to be there because you need data that's coming along, but over time, 90% of the sequences have been Delta virus from the country. We know that. We're not adding anything new unless there's a new mutation. We have to constantly be on the lookout for mutations with sequencing. But on a routine basis, if you use an RT-PCR that can detect the S gene along with, say, ORF1A or along with N gene, and the S gene is not detected in that particular assay, you can safely say that it's probably the Omicron. So the Omicron can be used, the S gene can be used as a proxy marker for the possibility of Omicron. So this is the plots that you'd see, say, with ORF1, S and N, which would essentially what we call as, what we call for being positive. If you have the S gene dropout, it would essentially make it an Omicron virus. So going into is that it can be having an increased contagious window, or an increased viral shedding, or an increased environmental stability, which makes it more, which makes it more stable in the environment, thus helping spread faster, or it may have increased binding to the host receptor. So as you know, in comparison to the wild type of SARS-CoV-2, which had an R0 number of 1.1, that is, one person would essentially infect a second person, the Delta variant had an R0 number of 1.74, and the Omicron has presumably an R0 number of close to 3, which essentially shows that it is extremely transmissible. So the variants of concerns have been named as Alpha, Beta, Gamma, Delta as of now. And we have variants of interest. And the next variant that was to come out was either new, which was eliminated because it essentially had the word new, N-E-W in it, or it could be, it was to be Z, but again, it is common to a lot of surnames, which is why it was eliminated. And therefore, Omicron came up. So if we look at how the timeline of the variants have developed, initially we had quite a stable variant, following which we had the Beta variant and then the Alpha. And then from there, you see that the number of variants were much higher along the whole course. Right, prior to the Omicron actually coming up, 99.8% of the isolates around the world were of the Delta sequence. We are yet to get data from the Omicron because all our testing kits does not do the S gene proxy dropout for us to understand. But like the previous speakers had said, the curve for Omicron is extremely acute, and probably the fall will be that way too. If we look at the South African, what was their experience with it? 24% of the population who were fully vaccinated developed the disease, and it was 75% of new cases in the country. 28 years was the median age, 32 mutations, of course, in the spike protein, 42 days in which existing vaccines could be altered, and 11 countries, but they did have a peak with that. Now, the risk of hospitalization and death is definitely higher with the Delta variant, which is why it brought us literally to our knees in the country. But nonetheless, now, if we look at the Omicron variant, the first case, of course, was discovered here. It was not first, it's probably been there for a while now. More sequencing would have got us data, but this was a patient who was in Botswana, and the first case, this variant had 32 mutations in the spike protein, which essentially is the protein that binds to the ACE2 receptors of the human cell. In comparison to that, Delta mutations are only 9. So this does not seem to be like a variant of the Delta virus. The first case was a 36-year-old male who was Pfizer vaccinated, two vaccines he had received in May and June, so 6 months earlier. And he was negative before returning to Hong Kong and tested positive on 13th of November. The second case was a person across the hallway who was staying in the same hotel, quarantine hotel as the person 1, the index case, and Pfizer vaccinated also in May and June, and patient tested positive on November 18th. So there were quite a few mutations, which essentially brought about amino acid changes also, which is why the virus seems to be slightly less different. But nonetheless, it is important for us to understand that travel bans are not the way to go about it, because it's probably at your door already. The clinical features of this particular group of people who have been infected with Omicron, and as we're getting more and more data of it, seems to be extreme tiredness and fatigue, sore throat, muscle pain, dry cough, slight rise in temperature. There's no loss of smell or taste that was characteristic with the Delta variant that is there with this particular variant. Now, yes, there are more mutations in the spike region, and that is increased transmissibility. They also have the ability to escape the immune system, so the ability to infect a fully vaccinated person. There are certain monoclonals that do not act on these viruses, so just using a monoclonal at the early part is not something that we are looking at. As of now, we are having lesser severity of disease and fewer deaths, but nonetheless, though it is not extremely respiratory in nature, it is definitely causing a lot of debilitation as far as tiredness is concerned. All incoming passengers should be screened. Of course, this was the earlier part. I think right now, most of the kids should have the S gene silencing, and we should be able to know that. And citizens are urged to complete their vaccinations. If the virus is only causing a mild infection, natural infection may end the pandemic, like was told. Now, neutralizing antibodies, like I told you, there are quite a few neutralizing antibodies that are available in the market. They will help to bind with the spike protein and prevent the entry of the virus into the natural cell. But of which it is important that we have to remember that the Omicron variant is not susceptible to Kesirivimab as well as Indivimab, which is right now available in India. And hence, neutralizing antibodies are not the way forward for us. Now, coming to the question of today's talk, that is vaccination boosters. I'll bring your attention to this picture, the first picture here on immunology of COVID-19 simplified. And it's about the tale of two walls. So basically, when you get yourself vaccinated with the first dose of the virus, you develop neutralizing antibodies. And with the second dose, you also develop T-cell immunity. And that helps to prevent the virus from entering the or infecting the person. Now, after 6 months, what happens is the number of neutralizing antibodies have seemed to be reducing in number. But the second wall, that is the T cell, which we do not really look at. In fact, this is probably the more important wall because most viral infections are actually T cell, they are protected by T cells rather than the antibodies. We're not looking for antibodies in many of the viral infections because our T helper cells and the T killer cells, these are the ones that CD4A and CD8 cells are the ones that help to kill the virus. Over time, in an unvaccinated person, you have no first wall at all. So there are no neutralizing antibodies. And only when you encounter the virus will the T cells start developing infections, which is why it is important for us to understand this. Now, coming to the second picture here, for severe disease and vaccination. Now, the number of unvaccinated people with infection is much higher in comparison to the vaccinated people with the same number of infections. The number of severe infections is much lower. And what happens 6 to 10 months down the line? So in unvaccinated people, they're still as susceptible as what we were. The vaccinated with 2 doses are a little less susceptible for the, for the requirement of, or for the development of severe disease. And if they are boosted with, a boosted dose or a protective dose, and then that would essentially mean that even lesser number would essentially develop severe disease. So people with 2 shots, and with Omicron also, there is a risk of developing infection, but severe disease is much lesser. But people with 2 shots and a booster, they seem to have 25 times more protection. Now, this is, this is a study on the Pfizer vaccine. And here you will see in this graph here that unvaccinated versus partially vaccinated versus fully vaccinated, the difference is really huge. So partially vaccinated and fully vaccinated people, also it is quite huge. So what happens is there was a rush for the vaccine with the second wave, that is the Delta wave, following which we saw people losing interest in taking their second shot. Not even the booster, I'm talking about the second shot. So sometimes, there is a need for fear to act as a reason for people to take their, their shots. And so it is important to understand that this was, of course, among healthcare workers in New Delhi, on people who had vaccinated with Covaxin. And we found that those who were fully vaccinated developed the infection at a much lesser rate. This is on the Pfizer vaccine that I was talking to you about from Israel, where they looked at the booster non-immunized versus the booster immunized. And again, the difference is very stark to show that the booster immunized definitely had better protection against the virus. So, of course, they say with the Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca, boosters are definitely recommended. With Covaxin and Covishield also, we have recommended that. Now, just to close off, what about the fourth Pfizer dose? Will that halt symptoms like how now Israel is going to be the first country? Now, when comparing the 2 doses and the 3-dose groups, the rates of progression of symptomatic infection to death were 1.3 and 1.36, and severe disease was about 4.3 and 3.3, and hospitalizations was about 6.9 and 5.6 in this study that was done. So the absolute risk between the 2 and 3 doses are actually negligible at 0.1 and 1.3 respectively, but serious outcomes can definitely be reduced. So the additional dose of an mRNA vaccine that is currently being distributed may result in more robust and long-lasting immune response, obviating the need for further boosters. But Israel actually says that they're going to try it with the first shot. Maybe the new vaccines, the DNA vaccines, the nasal vaccines that are coming out may give us better protection. But until then, get vaccinated, wear a mask, maintain physical distance, give an importance to indoor ventilation, because air seems to be the way the whole concept of air ventilation and the kind of protection that we can give is definitely different. Good hand hygiene and self-isolate if you have any symptoms. With that, I'd like to hand it over to you. Thank you so much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anusha, for putting it so nicely and briefly and quite clearly. Thank you very much. Before I bring Dr. Kazi in, I think, I would like to ask Dr. Anand Mohan a question which is exercising everyone's mind. Suppose I have infection, which is mild. Then I'm told stay at home, isolate. How long should I stay? And after that duration, which the government has specified, what should be my behavior? Can I straight go back to office and start working? Do I need to wear a mask or not? Similarly, if I'm isolated and asymptomatic, someone in the family got infected, so I also tested myself. I have no symptoms, but I'm positive. What should I do? Could you very briefly tell that? We are already above time. Dr. Anand Mohan, please.
Yeah. So what the recommendations currently are, and they are pretty clear in the national guidelines, that retesting is not really recommended. That is one. It is not really recommended as a routine. Of course, if somebody specifically wants it for some other important purpose, if some company wants to make sure his employee is negative and they specifically ask, then that's a different matter. But from the public health perspective, generally retesting is not required as a routine. Initially, as you remember, the time duration was 10 days about 6 months back. Now it has been reduced to 7 days, only probably because of the mild nature of the illness. So once a person is infected, after that, from the onset of the symptoms, a period of 7 days, in which at least for 3 days he should be afebrile and asymptomatic. So that is what is another criteria. If he is not afebrile or asymptomatic, then he needs to stay on at home for another couple of days till he fulfills that criteria. That may be 10 days, that may be 14 days also. But if he is asymptomatic, then at 7 days he may come back to work, and retesting is not really recommended as a routine. Of course, these things are all, they don't say suppose he's in a healthcare setup and he's actively going to be in contact with immunocompromised patients. So as a case-to-case basis, you may advise, okay, get a retesting done. But this is not a routine. Similarly, for asymptomatic people who are just tested positive, just by the way they are asymptomatic, the same thing holds true from the time that they diagnose positive, because they don't have symptoms. You can't start the day count from the symptom onset. So from the time they test positive, from that time, the same duration of 1 week is there, and then they can come back to duty if they remain asymptomatic throughout. So more or less, this is the general broad, simple kind of a guideline. Of course, having said that, beyond that, they need to continue with the COVID appropriate behavior and the masking, because that is still a kind of that is still across the board for everybody. So irrespective of whether you are just negative or you retest or not.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anand. And mask, would you recommend N95 mask? They are freely available in our country. They are not very expensive by and large, and they are more efficient. What about the cloth mask? Because most of the time we see people wearing cloth masks.
Yes, again, so, there are all different varieties are available. And so because in last year when this whole thing started, N95 was not available to everybody, but masking had to be done for everybody. So how can we give an N95 mask to a person staying in a remote village? So these were the logic behind, giving options. So options are there. Cloth mask is also an option, which is a reasonably good option when you have nothing else. So it gives a good degree of protection, maybe not as good as N95, but now it is recommended to wear a cloth mask along with the surgical mask, that blue mask which is there. So a double masking also is recommended, which probably is better than either one alone. Of course, if one has the option of N95, that may be much better. Given the circumstances, a lot also depends on how long you have to wear it, the tight fit, the comfort level. So all of these factors are together, they will determine what mask suits a person at best. N95 scientifically, yes, it is the best, and cloth with a surgical mask is a reasonable second option.
Thank you. So a mask definitely, and the best mask is the N95, followed by the surgical mask, and then a cloth mask. If you're wearing a cloth mask, if it's a multi-layered mask, that is much more, that is much better than having a single layer. And frankly, I would like to tell everyone that PhD Chamber of Commerce and Industry had a great role to play in generating the film, so that all this manufacturing of PPEs, the N95s, the surgical masks started in a big way in India in the early days of the pandemic in 2020. And today one can say proudly that not only are we self-sufficient, but we are exporting to other parts of the world, and also within the country, these are available at very, very affordable rates. So things have changed dramatically. Just as Dr. Anusha told how quickly the medtech industry started manufacturing kits, how quickly today we have over 3,100 labs in this country which are able to do RT-PCR testing, and there were only a handful which were there when the pandemic started. So really, there has also been this opportunity within the pandemic, and also we have actually recognized our own potential. If someone had told us, as Dr. Anusha very rightly said, if someone had told us that there would be, thousands of labs doing RT-PCR in this country even 2 years ago, we would have just laughed and said that's just not possible. And here, I must also compliment NABL for the way they went about recognizing, accrediting labs, spending time of the day and night, because they used to work a full day, and then 6 p.m. to 12 p.m., even 1 o'clock at night, they were doing the accreditation process, all done online and done. In fact, it was much more exacting process than when it is done physically. And kudos to you and others like you, because we accredited our genomics lab, where fantastic, our own potential we realized through this pandemic. So there were good things that came out. Of course, those who lost lives, there is no way our loved ones will come back, and it was a tragedy in that sense. Dr. Qazi sir, the floor is open for you for your remarks, your own experiences, and then we will call it a day.
Thank you very much. I will not take much time because I'm a forced entrant here. I was not supposed to.
No.
Be there.
You are most welcome, sir.
Let me first of all, say that how pleased I am to be here for this last 1 hour to see, to hear the experiences of the people. I must endorse and say that what Dr. Anusha mentioned and wonderful presentations that she gave. We in HIMSA, Hamdard Institute of Medical Sciences and Research, I don't know how many of you here know that about us. We are a small, partner in this whole process here. We're in south of Delhi, 700-bedded hospital. 400 of these were dedicated to COVID patients, and we were perhaps in this part of Delhi, the first one to go for ICMR NABL accreditation for RT-PCR, and that was much early. In fact, we started, I don't know how, we started even before it was announced as pandemic, because I assembled the BSL-2 plus facility within 2 months, and it was much before the pandemic was announced. Because it was a need, of course, for virology in our institute, but we were ready, right at the right time. So that I must, compliment ICMR and NABL for creating this kind of enabling factor. I think because I'm a bench scientist basically and have been, part of the regulation all over. I think this pandemic has taught us. A lot and we are confident and say that anything in India, we can face it. I used to be told by my father, I remember when I was a kid, that whenever you face an eventuality, say it will pass. Don't bother about what is, say it will pass. He used to tell me this in Persian, May Guzrat, that this will pass. So that is what was the code word that we used to, say. Don't worry, it will pass. It will pass. It is particularly when we are talking of viral infection. I'm a microbiologist basically, so therefore we would know that it will pass. But we also know at the same time that doesn't mean that we should be complacent, because we have seen what Anusha showed us, the whole trajectory, how these viruses mutate and where we can land. We should still be not complacent, because we may have surprises in next 1 month or maybe 2 months. We may have yet another variant which can sometimes be overwhelming. But what I just wanted to say is that as an educationist, I would like to say that what have we learned from here? You will be pleased to know that at least 10 clinical trials are going on in my institute today with various partners on COVID. And we are also simultaneously working on Indian system of medicine, because that's where my scientific background was there. I was director of Indian Institute of Integrative Medicine, where we were trying to integrate the pathies that we have available to us. So I just wanted to, we don't have much time, so I would like to say that it's a learning process. I remember when in 2008, I joined Hamdard as a vice chancellor of the university, this university here from the CSIR. I came here. First project that I started here was the vaccinology. 2008, nobody could imagine. And I was, my partner at that point of time in creating the project was So it was Krishna Ella, famous, Bharat Biotech. So we started working together at that point of time, how to create a program in vaccinology. So these are the learning processes which I believe that from this pandemic, It will pass, of course, but then we should be prepared for a future. And this kind of, we established Hillman Lab on our campus, which was working on vaccines, rotavirus actually. And so what I want to convey is that every eventuality should give us lessons to learn, and then our future can be much more secured if we actually do not forget about these and we pass on. Let me now end here and say that all these experiences which were shared with us, we have practically faced in our hospital. Almost every next day's third day was a different kind of a program that would be thrown on us to take it forward. And so I think there's a learning process, and hopefully we'll come out of it. It will definitely pass, and then we are going to actually be prepared for future, for better future for our particularly for our children who are still actually waiting to be vaccinated fully. So thank you very much for giving this opportunity to me to be part of this 1 hour, learning process. And hopefully in future, we will meet more and more often and share our experiences. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you so very much, sir, for your remarks, your wisdom, and I'm sure this too will pass, as your father used to say.
Yes.
It's really an honor for me to thank the speakers, Professor Anant Mohan, Dr. Laharia, Dr. Anusha, and you, Dr. Kazi, for the wisdom of your words, of your experience, sharing experiences of the pandemic with us, showing us the way forward and the correct thing to do in these troubled times, and also for telling us that even though it appears to be mild, it is only milder than the Delta variant.
Yes.
And probably if this variant had come in March, April, we may have been singing a different tune when so little of us were vaccinated. So with that, I also thank PhD Chamber of Commerce and Industry for giving me this opportunity to moderate this session. It's been absolute pleasure. And over to you now, Vivek.
Thank you. Thank you.
One question, Dr. Mahajan, with your permission, one small thought.
Please, sir.
You see, as a chamber, we need to give some policy recommendation to the central government that how at the very earliest we can provide universal healthcare to every Indian. Now, we have seen the cases which are happening in America, 10 lakh cases a day, in England and all these advanced countries. One knows that their hospitals are, of a much superior, they are, population to hospital facility are fantastic there. I think it will take at least 20, 25 years for us to reach that sort of medical facility compared to population. What my suggestion is, because Dr. Kazi comes from the Unani sector, I am from the Ayurveda center. One believes that if we have, for the preventive and wellness, if we have the Ayush system as the first line of defense and the allopathic system also coming in, according to me, I think one day, if you feel it proper, we need to have a debate on this subject, that within 5 years, how can we provide healthcare to each and every Indian? So maybe this would be the best way forward. And each of the panelists has been simply fantastic. I loved the presentation by Dr. Anusha Rohit. Those charts were simply fantastic. And of course, each and every speaker, Dr. Anand Mohan, Dr. Laharia, fantastic. It was really wonderful and really informative to sit and attend your session. Thank you very much for an outstanding thing. Vivek, back to you.
Thank you, President. Thank you for those encouraging remarks, as well as also setting out an agenda of what we could look at going forward. And of course, we've been having a lot of webinars also on the Ayush sector. and where there are a lot of facts which have diverged themselves, telling all of us that our huge systems have played a great role in increasing the immunity of people. And institutes like All India Institute of Ayurveda at Delhi has also treated patients very well. Of course, they were not of acute nature, but then there has been a specific contribution on that front by the Ayush sector as well. And I think that is one of the reasons we are seeing in India, because somewhere down the line, you know, the Ayush system of medicine or ingredients sit in our kitchens. And that's what I think has been helping a lot of families to build up better immunity and better better health on an overall scenario. So I have 2-3 quick questions, which I don't think we should be ignoring since they are in the chat with the permission of Dr. Mahajan. The first question is from Mr. Rahul Sahai, which came in pretty early enough, but I think still holds good. And he says, as government is saying that there's no need of retesting after 7 days in case of mild symptoms, but people who have tested even after 16 days are coming positive. That means if they've come, they've tested negative, they're still coming back after 16 days of being positive.
I could answer that, Vivek.
Sure.
In all probability, it's dead virus. Yes. And so the person is not infectious anymore. RT-PCR is a very, very sensitive test, but it doesn't differentiate between dead and live viral protein. And so they needn't fear. They will not infect anyone unless, of course, someone is immune compromised. But an immune compromised person would not be getting treated at home. So it's only in the immune compromised that, live virus can stay for nearly 20 days. Whereas in all others, 10 days is the outermost. After 10 days, if you test positive, then it is a dead virus. So please don't worry about it. And there's no need of retesting if you have no symptoms and if you're not immune compromised.
Thank you, Dr. Mahajan. I think that adds to the relief factor. There is also a question which I think is somewhere down the line got answered, which is what is the reason that Omicron is affected in lungs compared to other organ systems?
So Omicron doesn't affect, lungs as much as the Delta virus did. In fact, in lab experiments, they've said it's only about 10% as far as affecting the lungs goes as compared to the Delta variant. And that's why you're not seeing too many people coming with pneumonias.
Right. And I have this question from Mr. Hitesh Kumar. He says, sir, whether it will be over after this wave or every year we will see a new variant, vaccine booster will be required every year, question marks.
I think if Dr. Laharia is still here, he could answer that
Dr. Laharia
briefly.
Had to leave. Dr. Laharia had to leave. Yes.
Yeah, so it is believed that this is not going to end, that this will stay with us, that this will become endemic. And just as the other 4 coronaviruses that stay with us and cause common cold, this will also become like that. And that, of course, that is all is in the realm of speculation, because we don't know. This may mutate into something even worse that we will know only with time. But if we look at the benign course of this disease, then it stays with us, causes 8,000-10,000 cases, a day, then it goes away, then it comes back. That is how it's thought that this is going to pan out. But we needn't fear it, because we will all be well vaccinated, and vaccinations have already proved during this wave with Omicron that you do not get severe disease.
Sure. Right. And I'd like to take the last question, which is in the Q&A. That's from Kanchan Zutshi. She says it's a very informative session. I was about to get my 15-year-old son vaccinated, but he developed symptoms of cough, got his RT-PCR done, and it's come positive. Only mild symptoms. Now, when should I get him vaccinated?
Well, the government of India recommends that you be vaccinated 3 months after complete recovery from COVID. This is what the government of India recommends. In England, they recommend 28 days after getting, free of COVID. In the US, they say as early as possible, but I would tend to agree and follow the Indian government guidelines, because in the 3 months following an infection, your chance of getting reinfection is very, very minimal, very low. Children, in any case, mount a very robust immunity after infection. So 3 months is what I would suggest.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mahajan. One question which I have on a WhatsApp is that there is a girl who is about 24 years old, and she has developed persistent cough. And earlier she tested negative, and then she tested positive. There's persistent cough. So what should be really done? Would Professor Anant Mohan?
I see that Professor Anant Mohan is here. Professor Anant Mohan is here. I didn't see that he was here. He could have taken up the earlier questions as well. Professor Anant, would you kindly answer this question?
Yes. So I think the question is persistent cough after recovery. Is that it?
No, it starts with persistent cough. Test shows negative. After a few days, the test shows positive, and the persistent cough continues. No other symptoms.
There are a couple of things. The test being negative and then coming positive could most likely mean that the earlier negative test could be falsely negative. That is one. Or sometimes there may be that the same dead virus which is being picked up that Dr. Mahajan talked about. But if it is associated with some new symptoms, then one can think about a reinfection coming up pretty early. That is one. Now, a persistent cough is a very common feature, relatively common feature, which may persist for many days, for even up to several weeks after the actual illness. And it is mostly because of the inflammatory response of the virus on the throat and the nasal mucosa, etc. In this, the treatment is standard, just give a bit of cough suppressants, cough syrups, warm salt gargles, and we recommend a short course of inhaled bronchodilators, steroid inhalers, which is some budesonide inhalers, which is to be given in this subgroup of patients. So by and large, people settle well all of these. We can give some anti-allergics. And we also look for underlying disease, whether he has any other underlying allergic tendency or pre-existing disease which may be responsible for the cough. By and large, with all these measures, the person recovers.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, Professor.
Vivek, I have one question, if I'm allowed to.
Please, SG, please.
Yeah. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It was an excellent, thought-provoking webinar that we heard today. My question is that what is the significance of this 39 weeks of gap between the second dose and the booster dose when a person is 60 plus and he has comorbidities? That means he's got high hypertension and he's also got sugar. So what is the significance of 39 weeks gap? Why should this be there, 9 months of gap?
Is Professor Mohan there?
Yeah. So basically what is happening is that one needs to define what is the likely duration of antibody protection after the initial 2 doses of the standard vaccination. Now, one doesn't know that absolutely with certainty, but whatever has been done across in other countries, it shows that once the 2 doses have been given, then the antibody protection response and the concentration of neutralizing antibodies remains for somewhere around 6 to 9 months, at least. In some studies, it has been a little longer, and some it has been a little less. But a median of 6 to 9 months, it persists. That is why and after that, it starts to decline. So that is why the logic is that at 9 months probably would be the right time to boost up the immune system by giving the third shot or the booster shot at around 9 months or so. So that is what. So now again, these things may change in future. A lot of things change as more and more evidence comes up. But as of now, the crux of the information is this, and that is the basis for which this 9 months duration has been given.
But sir, I would like to again re-ask this question. In US and in Israel, UK, large number of people who had booster doses, they were again tested positive. I mean, it was a phenomena which was recent, and they were administered booster doses immediately after 3 months. So despite that happened, so for comorbid patients or comorbid persons of senior citizens, they are most likely to get it. I mean, with the kind of infection which is roaming around, Omicron being a very, very infectious disease, I think this duration of 39 weeks should be done away with. That is what is my our recommendation. What have you to say?
See, I really cannot, these things have been decided by a group of people who have looked at all the literature around the world, and there is a task force meant for this purpose with a lot of people in the basic scientists and epidemiologists. So I don't think I should be talking and saying that what they have said is wrong or something. Like I said, things are in evolution. New evidence coming up may change the whole story. But a couple of people, or maybe not couple, but people getting infection, people will get infection even otherwise, whether unvaccinated or vaccinated, all people will get infection. People after booster will also continue to get infection in some proportion. That is also, so that will happen, This is not really a means to 100% prevent infection. It is more of a means to prevent mild infection progressing to severe disease and preventing deaths and severity. That is the purpose of this vaccination process actually. So if it fulfills that purpose, then one will say that vaccination is probably successful. But having said that, so we'll wait and see how things evolve. There are different views all across the world. It's true, different experiences are there.
Also, if I may just add that, the vaccines we are using are different from the vaccines that have been used in the US and Israel, where they have used mRNA vaccines, which are very, very effective, but where the neutralizing antibody levels are seen to fall quicker than what they do with our own Covaxin and Covishield. Also, it is said that our vaccines are giving a more robust cellular immunity. T cell immunity is said to be more robust with Covishield as compared to the mRNA vaccines. And I'm sure the committee which chose to do 9 months went into a wealth of data that's available, and that's when they came up with the 9-month number, because there's no shortage of vaccines for us. In our country, there's no shortage. Even if they had said 6 months, there was enough vaccines to, cover for that. So there has to be some, science behind this decision.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Right.
So one may just add that the vaccine that we are using, the Covaxin, is a whole virus vaccine. So it does have certain advantages also, or the cell. It is a vaccine built out of the whole virus. So it is supposed to, and at least it should take care of several mutations or variants also. So we'll have to see, but that is the logic behind the whole virus vaccine.
In fact, it is even better than the adjuvant used in our vaccine is much better than even the adjuvant used in the Sinopharm vaccine, which is why it is known to give better, protection to the people who are administered with it.
Yeah, aluminium-based.
Right.
Dr. Mar, thank you for getting these sort of positive people right here, because the confidence they build in each of us is phenomenal. Thank you to each one of you. Really great. At least रात को नींद ठीक आएगी. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And President, we are 45 minutes over time.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And we have still 2 more questions to go
I think if I know Dr. Harsh Mahajan, he would be waiting to reach 2-3 different TV channels, but take his permission. That's what he advises.
No,
Dr.
please
Mahajan,
go ahead.
Yeah,
please go ahead.
Yeah.
It's okay.
So one is from, one question is from Vinita Mehra. And she says, why are we seeing reinfections for the third time as well when we talk about immunity after COVID? And they're vaccinated as well. Professor Anand Mohan, please.
Yeah, again, the same, one had not tested their antibodies before they got the reinfection. Who knows, they did not mount a good immune response. Maybe their antibody response fell short. Maybe it declined faster. So there could be, again, these many reasons could be there. And, vaccines, like we said, is not 100% effective in preventing infections. It is much more effective in preventing infections from becoming severe. So probably that answer.
Right.
Also, it could be riskier behavior. We are, despite the vaccine, we are supposed to be following COVID appropriate behavior. So getting an infection right, probably it's a youngster who is not following the norms or not masking, or is very, very unlucky to be caught 3 times.
Yes. And let me club the last 2 questions into one, because I said there were 2 more questions, but it happened to be 3 by the time I could finish the first one. Sir, how is the COVID virus mutating so rapidly? What's the reason behind it? And when can a 60+ aged person take his booster dose after being infected by COVID recently?
Dr. Anusha, this is right up your street.
Thank you so much. So COVID is caused by an RNA virus, which is known to mutate. An RNA virus multiplies multiple times. It does not have a correction mechanism in it that does not allow mutations. So mutations happen very easily with RNA viruses, like the HIV, all of these things, which is why we haven't been able to find a vaccine, a good enough vaccine target for HIV also. So that answers that part of the question. And the second part of the question, again, I think has been dealt with earlier. So it's again a 3-month is what we have on data right now. After the infection, 3 months later, you can take your booster, because we don't know any better. Probably time will give us even better answers, because we get better with experience. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Anusha. I think time for me to, call upon Dr. Deep Goyal, because we've had a fantastic discussion today. Everyone is overwhelmed with the, information. And of course, thanks to Professor Anand Mohan, Dr. Laheria, and Dr. Anusha, Rohit, and of course, Dr. Kazi. And because we cannot thank them enough, I would request Dr. Deep Goyal, co-chair of our Diagnostics and Hospital Committee, to propose a vote of thanks. I know Dr. Deep is on the move.
I think he's not. Dekh lo kisi aur if Dr.
Dr. Samir, if you could kindly do the honors.
Yes, of course. I think I would like to wholeheartedly thank everyone who's joined us today. I think we would all agree that this was an excellent session, and I think it's reflected by the fact that we're almost 45 minutes, or almost an hour over time. The speakers were all excellent, whether it was Dr. Laheria, who was talking about the vaccine, the entire epidemiology component of things. Dr. Mohan gave a very good insight into what we are seeing clinically, what's happening in the hospitals, and Dr. Anusha gave some very good insights about how the vaccine, about the virus, and how the Omicron mutation happened. I would like to thank the entire leadership of PHDCCI for organizing this very informative webinar. Dr. Kazi, thank you so much for joining us and giving us your valuable input. Dr. Mahajan, the chair of the Healthcare and Diagnostics Committee, and Dr. Deep Goyal, the co-chair of the Healthcare and Diagnostics Committee. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sameer. Thank you, chairs, co-chairs. Thank you, President. Thank you, SG. And thanks, Dr. Ravi Rathod, my back-end man behind the scene who has been working very hard on bringing all these webinars to you. Thank you very much, one and all. And have a safe and a good evening ahead. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
And a weekend.
And a weekend.